Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on Chapter 20 rules with Maine Forest Service. My name is Morton Mosswild. I am the field team leader for the Forest Policy and Management Division. And I am joined by our three regional enforcement coordinators, whom many of you know, Adam Cates, Terry Coulong, and Dan Jacobs, who will be your primary presenters this morning. This is a webinar, a workshop that we conceived of after the workshops that we did in June. Some of you may have attended. We did 3 workshops around the state, kind of an overview of harvesting rules. And one of the outcomes of those workshops was that there might be an opportunity to go a little deeper on a few of the topics that came up, and some of the questions that we had indicated that there was an opportunity to go into a little bit more depth. So this webinar, we sent out invitations primarily to those of you who are either involved with harvest planning for Clearcuts or potentially involved, and great response. There's a really good group here today, and I really appreciate everyone coming. So Adam's running the board for me, and I just ask you to go to the next slide. So just very briefly, the outline for today, I have the easy part, which is just a quick overview. Adam is going to talk about harvest plans and some of the process and elements of that. Terry is going to talk about some of the key questions and interpretations, and Dan will then follow up with some of the key problems that we encounter. So the best way for us to do this is to ask everybody to leave your camera off and to stay muted. Kind of gives the best experience for everybody. We will be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, please type them into the chat. We're a little limited just by time frame and this format in the way that we can have discussion, so we'll try to get to any and all questions. Also, it's a pretty sizable group, so it's going to be just a little bit limited with actual voice discussion. So we'll certainly be glad to follow up after the webinar this morning with individual questions, and just recognize that we might not be able to get to every single question or answer every situation or issue that may come up. So we're also recording this presentation for a number of folks who said they couldn't attend. So that should be available not too long after the presentation itself. And I'd also note that we did get approved for 1.5 SAF licensing credits. So I'll put my email in the chat later on. And if you need those credits, if you want to be recognized for those credits, let me know. I can get you a certificate and make sure, particularly if you're not in the participant list, if you're participating with others on one computer, let me know just so that I can record and document your attendance today. The next. So as I said before, this is a webinar on the Chapter 20 rules and trying to cover a few of the items that that perhaps provide a little bit more background or a little bit more detail than previous presentations. And I think everybody's familiar with the Chapter 20 rules. Basically, the purpose is to regulate the size, arrangement, regeneration, and management of clearcuts. Basically applies to all landowners with more than 100 acres total. It's in regard to clear cutting as a silvicultural practice. So clearing land to change the use to something other than forest management is not considered clear cutting. We'll touch on that briefly, but I think most folks are aware that change of land use is not clear cutting in the silvicultural sense and in the regulatory sense. As might be expected, we find that compliance with this is with Chapter 20 is good. It relies on people doing good planning, laying out clear cuts and supervising clear cuts. So this is not a matter of necessarily poor compliance. It's a matter of hopefully giving you some information that'll make compliance a little bit easier and a little bit more efficient for you folks. The next, Adam. Okay, so we're really not going to go into the nuts and bolts of clear cutting. We're going to assume pretty broad familiarity with a number of these, with most of the information about basic regs about clear cutting. If you want a bit more background, we're also doing a webinar, half-day webinar on the 26th of October. If you know of folks who might want a broader overview of all the rules, not just Chapter 20, but also the water quality rules and the LUPSI rules that we enforce. So this is just a quick snapshot of some or most of the detail of the clear cutting rules. What we're intending to do is really focus on the Category 2 and Category 3 clear cuts, which become more involved. They are some of the issues that we see most often, some of the most frequently asked questions. Certainly, other unrelated or broader questions might come up today. Certainly let us know if there are other things that we don't cover today that are of interest to you or that you need help with. But for today, the focus really is on those Category 2 and Category 3 clear cuts. Just want to emphasize that hopefully most of you know that the forestry rules and regs, they're all on our website. There's a page devoted to rules and regs, and that includes the Chapter 20 rules. We are absolutely always open to questions, but at the same time, I'd really encourage people. A lot of times the information you're looking for might be right there in the rule. So if you're working on this topic, take a moment, read through the rules, try to look for those sections that are relevant to your situation. Think about what the information you're reading says about how you might handle a particular situation. And then again, certainly call us if you have specific questions or are working on a particular approach. We're certainly always open to questions, but at the same time, the more background you have and the more specific your question can be, the more useful we can be in kind of responding to the questions that you might have. So in a moment, I'll turn it over to the presenters here. As most of you probably know, Adam, Terry, and Dan, they are our regional enforcement coordinators. It's a real privilege to work with these folks. They are very knowledgeable, very professional, and hopefully they'll give you some helpful information, and they are always a great resource for you. So I will, without any further ado, turn it over to Adam to start us off.
Thank you, Mort. Welcome. I appreciate everyone tuning in today. We'll start this training off, or at least I'll start it off with the harvest planning requirements that are found in our Chapter 20 rules. We'll talk a little bit about when a harvest plan is required, how long you have to keep the plan, and then dive into the plan elements, the things that we expect to see in harvest plans for Category 2 and 3 clear cuts. Toward the end of my presentation, we'll discuss some of the common issues that I see in harvest plans, some of the things to avoid when preparing a plan. I don't intend to read the rules to you. I apologize, most of my slides are very text heavy. There's not a lot of photos and things that I can show related to this. All of these things that I'll show you, most of them are found in the rules, and then I've added to those the actual language from the rules. I've added some of our comments and things to think about. So we'll get started. So category 2 and 3 clear cuts. For all category 2 and 3 clear cuts, the landowner shall develop prior to harvest a site-specific harvest plan. We'll dive into that site-specific aspect here in a little bit. For category 1 clear cuts less than 20 acres in size, no harvest plan is required. Category 2, which are your 21 to 75 acre clear cuts, a harvest plan is required prior to starting. And then category 3 require harvest plans along with an on-site review and approval process. We'll go through that process here in a bit so that everyone understands how that works on our end and for your planning. Harvest plans for category 2 and 3 clear cuts must meet 13 required elements, and they're all found in the Chapter 20 rules. Category 3 have an exception. There's a 14th element that we require for category 3 harvest plans. The harvest plans must be kept on file by the landowner and made available to us upon request until the regeneration standards are achieved. So we expect that if we call you up and say, we'd like to see your harvest plan for a specific clear cut, that you'll be able to pull that out and show us both for category 2 and category 3 clear cuts. We expect that you folks will have that on file and be able to display that upon demand. So a little bit about the clear cut review process. So the first step is the category 3, and this is just category 3s. Remember, category 2s, we don't approve them. We don't review or approve them. You keep category 2 on file unless we ask to see them. For category 3s, the first step is to actually indicate on the forest operations notification or amendment that you plan to create a category 3 clear cut. Then you'll submit the written category 3 harvest plan to the regional enforcement coordinator for the area where the Cat 3 is planned. We ask for that 60 days in advance. We often, for many of you that have worked with us, we often get out on site and process these things well in advance of 60 days. But certain times of the year, for example, now going into the fall, we're seeing an uptick in permitting. Just like you folks, we're busy as well. So we need a little bit of lead time to be able to get out there. Don't submit these on a Monday and expect that we'll have them to you, have them approved by Friday. It takes us a little bit of time to schedule the site visits, to review the plans and actually get back to you. So plan a little lead time when you submit these. With category 3s, by rule, we're required to visit the site with a landowner or landowner's representative. In most cases, that's the forester, that's you folks. We'll come out on site with the plan. I will have reviewed the plan before I get there. I will ask if you have any concerns about separation areas. Usually I'll spot check some of the separation. We'll walk in the block in several places and actually look at the harvest, discuss the prescription, look at the quality of the wood to make sure that matches the information in the harvest plan. Then we will do a formal response in writing, either with an approval letter or deficiencies required additional info. Sometimes I'll do the deficiencies and required info in advance of the site visit, just to speed things up a bit. We'll do that in advance. But before you can start, you need an approval letter from one of the RECs that your harvest plan has been approved and you're good to go. Approvals are valid for 2 years or the expiration of the fawn, whichever comes first. Does that mean that if your fawn expires and you plan to finish the block or even harvest the block in its entirety under a new notification, does that mean you have to create a brand new harvest plan? The answer is no. This is a safety valve for us and for you that things may have changed. Maybe another forester, for example, has done some harvesting in the separation area that you're unaware of. Maybe something has changed since you created that original harvest plan. So this gives us all a chance to revisit that harvest plan and just make sure that everything is still in compliance. In most cases, if I'm asked to extend an approval, I'll ask, has anything been done? Are there any significant changes to the harvest plan? If the answer is no, usually that's an automatic approval to extend. I jot down in my notes, I keep track of the new forest operations notification number, and we move forward and you folks are allowed to continue. It's just a safety valve so that we don't have a harvest plan that's 5 years old, someone jump into the harvest block and then realize that there's been changes. That can create problems. A well-written harvest plan should clearly answer the following questions: where, why, and how. Ideally, a new forester coming in behind you, maybe you swap areas, maybe someone leaves the company. Ideally, someone should be able to take a well-written harvest plan, read it, and understand where it's located, where the footprint of the proposed clear cut is, where the separation area is. Why is the clear cut proposed? What's the justification for the clear cut? They should be able to understand the site and stand conditions, the forest health, the things that justify that clear cut should all be in that harvest plan. And then the plan should also explain how you'll comply, or how the harvest will comply with Maine Forest Service regulations. Forest Practices Act, shorthand Chapter 20, separation area, stalking, the regeneration plan, water quality, all of that should be in a well-written harvest plan. And anyone should be able to pick that up and read that without actually talking to you, the author, and be able to get that information from that harvest plan. That's our expectation when we receive these to review. Harvest plans are not static documents. They're dynamic working documents that can change due to conditions you encounter during the harvest. Things change. The best laid plans will often change. Perhaps a portion of the block may not be harvested. You may get out there and discover there's other areas you'd like to incorporate. We expect that harvest plans will have addendums, amendments attached to them recording these changes. What we expect is, if we ask to see a harvest plan within a reasonable length of time, it will reflect what's actually happening on the ground. That could be map updates, that could be a change in forest operations notification, anything like that changes. We expect that this document, the harvest plans, will be updated and amended to reflect any changes going forward. So now we'll dive into the minimum elements of a harvest plan. These are all outlined, as I said, right in our Chapter 20 rules. I have a guidance document that was prepared in 2016, I believe it is, with much of the information I'm presenting today. So along with the required elements, there's a brief description of what we expect to see in those elements. It's a PDF document. After I'm done presenting, I'll try to share that in the chat. Feel free to grab that and download it. So some of the elements required in a harvest plan are very straightforward: landowner name, address, designated agent, signature of the licensed forester, date and the intent to the forest operations notification number, anticipated dates of the harvest. That's all pretty straightforward stuff. Anything you see in this light green color is actually copied from our rules. Anything in yellow is my additions, my comments to that. So the green is the rule, the actual rule, and then the yellow is sort of my comments or our comments related to that element. Number 6 is a certification signed by a licensed forester or a wildlife professional attesting the clear cut is needed to improve health, productivity, or wildlife habitat of the forest. That's fairly straightforward. Number 7, an explanation of how standards of Section 3 and Section 4, so our regen and clear cut standards of the rule, will be met. This isn't a simple statement that all rules will be followed, period. We're looking for much more than that. We're looking for details on how you intend to comply with the regeneration and clear cut standards. Included in that is the clear-cut acres, separation zone acres. As most of you know, category 2s and 3s, you need a 1-to-1 ratio. If you clear cut 100 acres, you need 100 acres of separation zone. We need to see that. We need to see the number of acres in SEP zone. We also need to see the number of acres in the footprint of the clear cut. We expect to see separation zone characteristics, including species, basal area, stems per acre, height, stand types, anything pertinent that describes the condition and the characteristics of the separation zone. I'll get into this more, but simply saying a simple statement that the separation zone meets minimum requirements. That's a blanket statement, and that's not acceptable. We're looking for more detail actually describing the site-specific separation zone characteristics. Desired regeneration outcome, anticipated species and stalking levels. Again, a blanket statement of the block will be regenerated within 5 years. That's fine, but we need more information on what do you anticipate you're actually going to grow there? What will be the species that you anticipate or desire? What will the stalking levels be? A description of that regeneration plan. And then a description of how the regeneration standards will be met. This includes post-harvest monitoring, regen assessment. It may include regeneration surveys. Most of you have some type of protocol in the background internally to actually verify regeneration. And this is the place where you will tell us what that is. Tell us what you're doing. If you have a protocol that in year 2, a forester visits the site, verifies it, perhaps you fly it with a drone, perhaps you do transects, whatever the process is that you folks use, this is where you tell us what you're doing to verify that that block is regenerated. The reason for the clear cut. All clear cuts, category 2s and 3s, must have one of these 4 reasons. The most common is A, removal of the poor quality, intolerant, short-lived, mature. That's the most common by far. 2/3 or even 3/4 of the plans we see pick item A. Use the most appropriate reason for the site. Note here that creation of regen is not a reason. We require blocks to be regenerated within 5 years, but the purpose of the clear cut can't be to create regen. It might be a secondary objective. Ultimately, it has to happen, but it can't be the primary reason for creation of that clear cut. So keep that in mind, that creation of regen is not one of these 4 reasons. More on the reason for the clear cut. Where most plans fall short, if someone asked me, of all the harvest plans you've reviewed, and I've probably reviewed, 150 or maybe even closer to 200 the last 5 years. If someone said to me, where do harvest plans fall short? Most plans fall short in the justification. The plans do not have enough detail to justify the reason for the clear cut. Statements are made like, the stand is being clear cut because the timber is mature, without supporting documentation to back that up. We're looking for species composition, harvest history, age of the stand, basal areas, diameters, height to diameter ratio, live crown ratio, anything like that. Any health issues, any soils issues that may support a wind throw justification. We're looking for real site-specific data to back up the justification for that clear cut. We're not expecting you're going to put 1 plot per acre, but we're expecting a good faith effort to describe the stand conditions that exist out there that led you to the clear cut prescription. Most plans fall way short in this justification. Number 9, this speaks to soil erosion potential of the harvest area and actions taken to protect riparian zones, minimize erosion into water bodies. Again, a blanket statement saying BMPs will be followed is not enough. We're looking for identification of the regulated areas or riparian areas that could cause issues with sedimentation, water quality issues. We're looking for site-specific BMPs. Which ones? Where? When will you apply them? Why are you applying them? One of the previous RECs coined a phrase, BMPs in all the wrong places. Just because you're using BMPs, that doesn't mean they're effective. Why are you using them? Where are you using them? What's the reason for the BMPs? Stream crossings. If you're at the point where you're creating a harvest plan, you should know or have a very good idea where you need to cross streams, how you plan to cross them, and what the closeout is for those crossings. The blanket statement of mapped and unmapped streams will be crossed, period. That's not enough. If you're at the point of planning this harvest, you should have a pretty good idea where you need to cross and how you plan to cross these streams to access the block. Soil conditions, anything related to terrain, slope, drainage class, soil erodibility, anything like that should be mentioned. We don't ask for a full soils report or soils map. It's not a requirement, but to get at many of these elements that we're looking for, sometimes it's much easier to run a quick web soil survey report that identifies all these issues. We will ask for that information one way or the other. Number 10, an assessment of the wind firmness of the separation zone. So here we're looking for information that gives us a level of comfort that the separation zone will hold up. If you create a 240 acre clear cut, what kind of assurance do we have that the separation zone is not going to blow down after you leave? Have you considered the wind firmness of the separation zone? Have you considered the health of the separation zone? And here we're looking for the health, species mix, rooting depth, pre and post harvest stalking. Will you be harvesting in the separation area? We often will see plans that are really, really fuzzy and gray, and it's unclear whether or not the separation area will be partially harvested or not. If you plan to partially harvest it, that creates more concern on our end for compliance and wind firmness. It's our expectation that you'll leave a wind firm separation area. So we'd like to see that discussed in the plan. Any other wind firmness considerations? I see things like history. You know, geez, this thing has existed for the last 15 or 20 years since it was PCT'd. It's showing no evidence of wind throw damage. We anticipate none going forward. I see things often in plans on the orientation of the separation areas with the prevailing wind, you know, some consideration of how the wind will affect those separation areas. So give that some consideration. Again, I see these falling short. The separation zone descriptions are sometimes a little short of what we expect. This is a pretty simple one. Number 11, a certification from a licensed forester or wildlife professional that the harvest doesn't occur within significant or essential wildlife habitats. We will often see statements that say that the harvest doesn't occur within essential or significant wildlife habitats, but with no data source to back it up. No consultation with MNAP. I know many of you have internal GIS using recent MNAP data. That's fine. Just reference that. Just tell us where you get this from. We would like to see where you're making that statement, what's basing the basis for that statement. If there are any elements out there, they should show on the map and they should be addressed in the plan. Many of them require approvals, permits, variances, other things. So if there are any of these essential or significant habitats, it should be in the plan and identified. The location should be on the map. Let's talk about the maps. To me, other than the justification, the map is one of the most important elements. It's the first place I go when I get a plan. When I open a plan up, the first thing I do is look at the map. The map should show a clear depiction of the clear cut and separation areas. It should show anything that's shared with other clear cuts. It should show things like yards, non-forested wetlands, areas that do not meet separation standards. We should see on these maps all the customary components: the scale, north arrow, legend, date, not a legal survey. If you're a forester preparing those, you should be including that on that map. Prepares name, signature, etc. All the things that you would put on on a professionally prepared map for a client should be on this harvest map. Just a simple screenshot from ArcView or your GIS program of choice is not acceptable. It should have some sort of a legend, scale. It should be clear. We often see maps that are way over cluttered with extraneous information that doesn't relate to the harvest plan. In these cases, from my perspective, reviewing harvest plans and maps, more doesn't necessarily mean better on the map. If it's not directly related to the harvest plan and the requirements of our rule, it doesn't have to be on there. More on maps. Additional information that will help clarify the harvest activity and support the information in the harvest plan. So we should see things like stand types. It doesn't have to be down to the nearest 1 acre, 2 acre threshold, but just even broad cover types. If you're describing, for example, you may have a harvest block that has PCT'd back in 1980 areas. You may have areas that were never thinned. You may have some very broad hardwood, softwood, mixedwood cover types, and you're referencing those in the harvest plan. It's nice to have at least a stand level, stand A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, however you choose to do it, but reference the written narratives with the map. It's very tough for us when we read a plan and it says things like the mixed wood area in the northwest corner. We have no idea how big that mixed wood area is, where it's geographically located, or even where in the harvest block other than the northwest corner. So it's nice to have some sort of a broad cover type description. So as you describe these things in the written narratives, we can georeference it back to the map. Obviously, any water bodies or zoning, anything that's a regulatory issue should show on those maps. Roads and yard areas, very nice to see, to understand how the wood will flow. Again, I didn't put it on here, but we should be seeing stream crossings as well. I would sort of put that in the roads, I guess, in the roads category, if you will. Anything related to the operability and harvest operations should show on those maps. Maps should not be too busy and too complex. RECs need to be able to understand your plan and approve a Cat 3 CC. Multiple simple maps are often better than one map, including too much detail. Very seldom do we kick a plan back because the map doesn't have enough detail. If anything, we often scratch our head and kick it back because it's too busy. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes it's handy to break it up into multiple maps that are clearer. The last here is number 13, and again, this is a required element for category 2 and 3 plans. A certification that the landowner has a plan to manage the regeneration. Sometimes we see the regeneration information in this section. Sometimes we see it back in item number 7. Doesn't matter where we see it, as long as it's in there. Somewhere we need to see a licensed forester signature certifying that there is a regeneration plan in place for the harvest block. And this is that number 13 addresses that element. Again, we see it in a couple different places, but one way or the other, we need to see the highlights of that regeneration plan. Desired outcome, again, we've talked about that, and how it will be met within the 5 years, post-harvest monitoring, regen assessment, so on and so forth. This is one extra element that's required for category 3 plans. So for all category 3 clear cuts, a harvest plan must include a summary of how the proposed clear cut and other adjacent harvest areas collectively provide for water quality protection, wildlife habitat needs. Think of this as a landscape level consideration. Cumulative effect of harvest activity, for example, in a watershed. Think of wildlife considerations, habitat needs, travel corridors. What is this harvest and the other clear cuts and harvests in the area? What's the impact on wildlife, water, collectively on water? Here's a great place to discuss Bmps to protect water quality, things you've considered relating to, for example, roads, changes in watershed. There may be changes in watershed stream flows because of large amounts of clear cutting in a watershed area. Anything like that on the landscape level should be discussed in this element 14. Some common issues. And I've touched on all these, but it's worth going through them again. Plans are not site specific. We see this all the time where we get a generic one size fits all plan. If I'm reading a harvest plan that describes any generic 200-acre block in Western Maine, and it's not site specific, that's a problem, and you're probably going to get it back. They need to be really site specific and focus on the elements and the characteristics of the harvest block: terrain, soils, stand conditions, access, all those things that go into a harvest plan has to be site specific. And if we're seeing one that fits anywhere, I mean, I often see plans that I can lay side by side and the narratives are identical and the blocks are 3 or 4 towns apart. That's not acceptable. These plans need to be site specific. Again, I beat the justification up. We need to see data. We need to see narrative information that supports that justification. I've mentioned it several times. Avoid the blanket statements. Regeneration standards will be met. Bmps will be used. Wind firmness is good. Separation areas meet minimum requirements. Well, does that mean that it meets 301 trees per acre? Or is it fully stocked? Is it 1,000 stems per acre? We're looking for that information more than just, yes, it meets minimum requirements. This is a big one. I often see stands are mature. Why? How do you know? What's out there? What are you seeing on the ground that tells you that that stand is mature? We're looking for top dieback, all the things that go into your decision to consider that stand mature. We should see that in the narrative. We should also see on the maps and even in the narratives discussions of any inclusions and exclusions. Those may be older category 1 clear cuts that are still online, meaning that they haven't timed out yet. There may be things that are related from past harvest history that create an inclusion or exclusion to your harvest block. The days of rectangle clear cuts, one prescription, they're gone. Over the years, the maps are getting more and more complex. The harvest histories are more complex. We should see some sort of a clear representation of exactly where you're clear cutting, any areas you're not clear cutting, and what's there, what's happening. If they're embedded category 1 clear cuts, those should be identified. And that's all I have on harvest planning. Any questions?
So we'll just take a moment. Terry's up next, but if there are any questions, this would be a good time. Either type them in the chat or that would be ideal.
I'll upload the PDF guidance document as well, which is very much the same information I just presented in a PDF format.
Great. Thank you, Adam. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I think that's a lot of great information, probably something you'll want to digest. And if you are all set, we can move on. Terry, whenever you're ready, I think we'll move along. We didn't schedule any specific breaks in this 2-hour webinar. So if you need to stand and stretch or whatever, that's kind of up to you, but we'll move right ahead with the next presentation. So Terry, take it away.
Okay, I'm assuming you can all see my screen up there.
Looks good.
So I'm going to go through some of the scenarios that you might see when you're trying to figure out specifically your separation zones. People call us all the time with questions about that and want to know, can I do this? Can I do that? So I've got our top 15, I guess I'd call it. They couldn't narrow it down to 10, but here we go. So this is a question that we get a lot. Can I cut right up to the boundary line? And the answer is yes, you can do a clear cut right up to the boundary line. However, you still got to have that separation zone around it. And a separation zone has got to be at least 250 feet in minimum. So you can see this one here. I purposely drew it irregular because a lot of you are sending in very irregular SEP zones, and that's fine. It's okay. As long as you've got your 250, let me grab my laser pointer here, your 250 minimum on each side of that, you can balloon it out however you need to in order to get that one-to-one separation. So we've got a 50-acre Category 2 clear cut nestled in the boundary line, and got our one-to-one, 50 acres. We had to do it pretty irregularly, but we got there. And I think I used Category 2s most of the way through here, but these would also go for Category 3s. Shared separation zones. That's another question that we get a lot. You can share the separation zones with other clear cuts as long as they're 250 feet apart and you have the acreage requirements of 1-to-1. You can't share that SEP zone's distance as part of your 1-to-1. So in this case here, we've got two 26-acre Cat 2s, and we've got a full 26-acre shoreland zone here, and we've got a full 26-acre shoreland separation zone here too, with the 250 shared between them, which is fine. On a public road, you have to have your separation zone on the same side of the road as the clear cut. You can't cross a public road with your separation zone. These parcels are considered non-contiguous because of the public road in there. You can harvest to the edge of the road without having separation zone right next to the road. This one here, we've got different landowners on each side of the road, or the same landowner, doesn't really matter. In both cases, you can cut right up to the road as long as you meet the SEP zone requirements. Here, we're 250 feet minimum away from the boundary line. Here we cut right up to the boundary line, both of which are options. But we can also see that our 1-to-1 is met on both sides of the road. People sometimes try to do this one, and this one doesn't fly. We've got a public road there, and it doesn't meet the FPA standards because the public road makes those two parcels non-contiguous. So here they tried to put a 45-acre clear cut here. They kept it 250 feet away from the boundary line. But right here, they've got 32 acres of SEP zone, and they tried to put the 13 remaining acres over on the other side of the road. And they can't do that because of it being a public road. So what they need to do is reduce the size of this clear cut. If you add these two sides to up here, comes to 77 acres. So they could reduce this, do a 38-acre clear cut with 39 acres of separation zone, and that would be fine. But you can't drop across a public road and grab those SEP zone down there. Non-contiguous parcels, SEP zone has to be on the same parcel. So here's another one, but this time we see we've got a private road. And a private road does not make this parcel non-contiguous. So we can have, here we've got the same scenario, you know, our 45 acres here with 250 minimum. Down here we went right to this, right to the boundary. But we do have to, because we have one landowner here, have to have a minimum of 250 feet separating these two clear cuts. And the roadway cannot be included. That is like a void. It just disappears. It isn't there. So you have to have the 250 on one side or another. And you can see here that they put the SEP zone down on this side because they had a little bit more land in order to make up that SEP zone. So with a private road, we're talking a void, and then you have to have the 250. Non-forested wetlands, we get that question an awful lot. A PWL1 or a PWL2 or any non-forested wetland in an organized town can't be used as part of the separation zone. Okay, so whatever width this is across, we can't use this as part of our separation zone. So if we've cut 80 feet from this non-forested wetland, then we need to jump across and get the rest of the 250 over on this side. If this was a forested wetland, then you can include it because obviously a forested wetland is considered forested land. You can use this non-forested wetland in your one-to-one area calculations. And if you wanted to bring this clear cut right up to the shoreland zone, that would be governed by other rules and zoning issues, Chapter 27 or Chapter 21. So you'd have to follow those rules in what you could bring up to that particular shoreland zone. This is not considered acceptable as a separation zone, okay? We've had people say, well, LUPC is mapping this as a PWL3, and we go out and we take a look at it, and that's clearly not a PWL3. It doesn't have 30 square feet of basal area, doesn't have 300 trees per acre. It used to, but when we're doing things for clear cuts or for most any other purposes, it's really whatever it is on the ground at the time that we look at it. So even though LUPC might say this is mapped as a PWL3, it really isn't. We would consider it a PWL2. So that's not acceptable in that area of SEP zone. So here we've got another private road here. Haul roads can't be considered part of the separation zone either. We've got to remember I talked about the void. This is another void. So what you'd have to do instead of 250 feet from the edge of the clear cut, if this is a 20-foot wide winter haul road, then you've got to extend it another 20 feet and get out there about 270 feet or more. You really have to make sure that you extend that separation zone to take into account those types of things. There are a lot of other types of property that are accepted from being part of a separation zone too. Non-forested wetlands, public and private roads, land management roads, winter haul roads, driveways, but also things like utility lines, development sites. If you've got a pipeline crossing through or railroad right-of-way, those are all accepted as well. So you've got to account for that and extend out your separation zone. So when you're planning your separation zone, one of the things that you want to look for is some openings that are not forested. If you've got multiple openings in your SEP zone, you really want to watch out. You might have an issue with your SEP zone depending on the proximity and the sizes of those holes. So basically, if you've got a hole that's more than an acre, you want to adjust your 1-to-1. If you've got it over 14,000 square feet, then you've got to adjust your 250-foot width as well. And if you've got less than 14,000 square feet, this is where you have to really be careful. When we go out and do our cruises, we do quarter-acre SEP zone cruise plots. And if there's two connected ones, then they're going to fail. So it's okay to have some of these things in your SEP zone, but you want to make sure that you aren't excuse me, you aren't having them too close together or too many of them. The better thing to do might be to boost up your SEP zone a little bit. And we see that most of you are. I mean, most of you aren't saying I want a 130 zone. You're being pretty cautious about that, but just wanted to point it out as an example of how something could fail. So if you have holes in your matrix that are greater than or equal to 1 acre, as I said, you need to compensate for that acreage. So here we've got a couple of log landings probably on the edges that are about an acre. And you can see they did the the 250 feet around those, and they also increased their SEP zone. We've got 2 1-acre log landings. So with our 54-acre clear cut, we bumped it up to a 56-acre SEP zone to make sure that we're accounting for those 1-acre bumps there. As I said, you need to adjust your SEP zone width if you have holes in your matrix that are greater than or equal to 14,000 square feet. So here we've got a couple, one's 18,000, one's 14,000, and we clearly bumped out our 250 around them so that our SEP zone maintains that minimum 250 feet all the way through. Here's one we get asked a lot. We're starting to have more and more developed areas out there in the woods. We've got wind farms. We've got solar installations. We have places where we've leased out a camp. You cannot jump across a developed area to use SEP zone. So in this case, it looks just like that previous one that we had, except this purple area is a developed area. So say it's a solar farm. In that case, your 250 has to be between the clear cut and the developed area. So they had to make their clear cut a little bit smaller in order to get that 250 there. This is another one that we've seen a few times. And we've got a couple of fairly significant streams that are running through our clear cut. And in this case, they buffered it pretty well, 250 feet wide around the stream because they wanted to use this as SEP zone. It made more sense the way they were harvesting it to make sure that it was SEP zone. In this case, they're less than 250. And that does not become part of the separation zone. That's going to become part of the clear cut. In general, anything that you have inside of a clear cut that's less than 250 feet wide is going to become part of the matrix of the clear cut, not part of the SEP zone. So very cautionary there. And that has to do a lot with the way that we cruise clear cuts. When we go out and we cruise, we take a plot on every single acre, but the starts of the lines are determined in the office by random numbers before we go out there. So we may end up with a whole bunch of points that are right against the edge of this or something, and it's not going to pass. So be very careful if you're buffering a stream to make sure that that buffer is actually going to meet separation zone requirements. This is a very similar situation. Somebody left an island of wood out there in the center, but it's more than 5 acres. Remember, anything less than 5 acres, we would not count. That would become part of the clear cut. We can't exclude it from the clear cut. But if it's less than 250 feet across, it may fail again because of the way that our cruise lines are calculated. If it's more than 250 feet across, then we're going to look at that on aerial photography or something and say, all right, we've got this greater than 5 acre, 250 foot wide blob in the middle. So we'll just map that and exclude it. And we'll make sure that cruise points don't fall, taking that into account. So just be aware, as one of my coworkers famously likes to say, you can do anything you want, but you need to be right. So, you may think a long skinny strip is going to work out advantageously to you, but if we have to go out and cruise it, it could be a problem and it could be part of that clear cut. Adam said to make sure that you know what your inclusions and your exclusions are. When I talk about an inclusion, I'm saying it needs to be included in the clear cut. It has to be part of the clear cut. When I'm talking about an exclusion, I'm saying that it can be cut out of the clear cut. We can reduce the acreage on those. So a separation zone has to be adjacent to the clear cut. And this, we've got an 8-acre overstory removal here. If this does not meet the standards for separation zone, then it has to become part of the clear cut. So remember, overstory removal is defined as leaving at least 250 trees per acre of softwoods that are 3 feet tall and hardwoods that are 5 feet tall, which is acceptable for a category 1 clear cut, but it's not acceptable for SEP zone for a category 2 or a category 3. Remember, your separation zone must have at least 60 square feet of 1-inch DBH or larger, and 40 square feet of that has to be 4.5 inches or larger. Or there's got to be 300 trees per acre of 10-foot tall softwoods and 20-foot tall hardwoods. So if this inclusion here doesn't meet the standards for SEP zone, it's not part of the SEP zone. It becomes part of the clear cut. And we see this a lot, again, changing dynamics over time, where we used to see a lot of smaller clear cuts, and now companies are finding it more advantageous to do the larger clear cuts. You might have a small category 1 clear cut that's included in your category 2 or your category 3. So you need to really be careful about the placement of that. If the OSR is adjacent to the separation zone, it has to meet the standards for SEP zone. So in this case, we've got an 8-acre OSR that was done, a number of years ago maybe, and we want to put a 22-acre clear cut here. This now becomes a 30-acre clear cut, and you've got to have a minimum of your 30 acres of separation zone. When I talk about an exclusion, I mean it can be excluded from the clear cut. So here, if 5 acres or more is non-clear cut and it's surrounded by a clear cut, that area can be excluded from the clear cut. In this case, we've got 6 acres of OSR where we've got just over 30 square feet of basal area, which doesn't meet separation zone standards, but because it's totally contained within the clear cut and is not next to the separation zone, we would actually be able to exclude that from the clear cut footprint. So right here we have a total of 36 acres that's been harvested. So we've got a 30-acre clear cut, and we've got 6 acres of OSR. So in this case, we can still go with this 30 acres of separation zone, because remember, the separation zone has to meet the 1-to-1 of clear cut. And again, SEP zone still needs to be 250 feet wide around it. So this is a question that we get asked quite a bit. Does a blowdown salvage create a clear cut? And the answer to that is no, as long as you only harvest the trees that are damaged. If you decide to go in there and just flatten everything, then you've got to go through the clear cut process. If you're going to go in there and just pick up the stuff that's already blown down, you don't have to do the clear cut, as long as you've documented this really well. So that means taking photos of it, doing a cruise that tells us this is standing, this is down. Definitely ask one of the MFS district foresters to go out and do a site visit and document this with you. As I said, you can only harvest the trees that have gone down. You can't advantageously say, well, I'm here, I've only got 20 square feet still standing, maybe I'll just kind of whack it. If you want to do that, then you've got to go through the clear cut process. But if you're just looking to pick some stuff up that has gone down, then you don't have to go through the clear cut process. And this is an actual area here. One of the companies actually that's on the call had done a very nice harvest. This was in a shoreland zone, and there was a terrible microburst that came across the lake, and it took down all kinds of stuff. And we allowed them to go in and salvage the trees that were down because they documented it with photography. They had done a couple of cruises, and I went out there and took a look at it and said, yeah, you know, it clearly had been harvested properly. It didn't meet clear-cut standards when it was cut, and it certainly met the shoreland zone standards. So we did allow them to take that down. And we tend to use this for really sudden, abrupt events like, you know, the Halloween wind event from a couple years ago, or a microburst. You know, if average weather that we have makes your wood fall down, then you probably haven't planned or harvested properly. And that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, we'll entertain them. You know, we're really happy to work with you, as Adam said, on any kinds of implementation issues. Call us if you've got questions. It's much better to have us take a look at it and help you through it than it is to see Adam or Dan or I after the fact, because usually we're there with, you know, our little whip and our little stick and telling you what you did wrong.
Yeah, certainly ask questions, let us know what issues you're facing. There's been a couple of items in the chat that Adam has addressed, so I don't know if there are any other things that hopefully everybody can see those in the chat, but if there are other questions, I think we're going to be just a minute or two while Dan gets his presentation ready. So this would be a good time. If you need to stand and stretch, that's a possibility. If you have other questions that you want to add to the chat, or questions you want to direct at Adam or Terry for their portion of the presentation, this is the time. It's a lot of information, and I hope people will take some time to review it afterward. You know, certainly, you know, after today, you'll have a chance to digest and so forth. So, you know, fully anticipate that we'll get more questions, and you'll be contacting RECs with particular issues. So I see that Dan has his presentation up, and looks like he's ready to go. So again, keep the questions coming in the chat if you need to, and we'll switch subjects and let Dan give his presentation. Dan, it's all yours.
Mort, but can I just jump in? Did you tell them that this is going to be available on our website so they can
I noted that. Yeah,
again to their heart's content.
Yeah, this is being recorded. We'll make the recording available, and yeah, so the material will be there. So yep. So Dan, it's all yours.
Can you hear me, Mort?
Sure can. You're good to go.
Okay. My name's Dan Jacobs. I'm the Regional Enforcement Coordinator for Northern Maine. My presentation is on Chapter 20, what we commonly refer to as FPA. I'm going to discuss some common violations and some ways to avoid them. Just as an aside, yesterday Adam told me that my presentation and slides were too colorful. I disagree. So the bulk of the presentation I'm going to deliver is going to be 4 violation scenarios. And I've listed those here for you to look at: inadequate separation zone width, inadequate separation zone stalking, inadequate separation zone stalking or width created by openings, and unplanned category 2 and 3 clear cuts. So all of these 4 scenarios are going to be linked to category 2 and 3 clear cuts over 21 acres. And One thing I'd just like to mention is that when it comes to 1 through 3, in my experience, I've seen most of those violations occur in Category 2 clear-cuts. And in my view, the reason is with a Category 3, you might think that our approval process and monitoring process is a lot, maybe over the top, but it can really help keep folks out of trouble. And in my opinion, I don't want to approve a Category 3 clear cut and then end up having a violation. So I want to make sure that everything looks as it should before the operation starts. So as I said, you'll see most of these issues occur in Cat 2 clear cuts, but they could also occur in Category 3. So the first scenario that I have, and each scenario I'll, like I said, give the reasons for the potential violation, some ways to avoid those situations, and then I've got some images that we can look at. And any images of an actual violation will be very old, as in probably a couple decades old. So there's no names or company names linked to any of this. So as a review, separation zones for clear cuts must be 250 feet wide. They must be adjacent to the clear cut. They must surround the clear cut. So some reasons for inadequate width, and this is not a comprehensive list, and I don't have all the solutions. I'm just giving some ideas and discussing and explaining what I've seen over the years. So planning was good, but there was insufficient layout or insufficient communication. In this situation, the harvester cut into the separation zone and created one or multiple sections where the SEP zone was less than 250 feet wide. So the solutions that I've seen over the years to avoid this problem and to avoid similar problems, make sure that your separation zone is delineated very clearly. So if you're using flagging, do a good job flagging. If you are using electronic devices like tablets and doing flagless layout, just make sure that the harvester understands the layout and the map is clear. Pre-harvest tailgate meetings, in other words, communication between the harvester and the forester. Make sure that the harvester knows where the separation is. And easy to understand maps. Adam touched on this in his presentation, but as foresters, sometimes we like to include as much information as possible on the maps. That can make the maps very busy and difficult to interpret. So sometimes simpler is better when it comes to mapping, to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We can also have situations where there was inadequate planning. And I don't mean to say that there was poor planning. I'm going to say that sometimes foresters don't give themselves room for error, and everybody makes mistakes. So building in a little bit of a cushion with your buffers or separation zones can be very helpful. So if there's no cushion, a harvester could potentially cut into the SEP zone and create areas that are less than 250 feet wide, creating a violation. The solution, in my view, is not only what we talked about before, the good delineation and the communication, but give yourself some cushion. Make your SEP zones a little bit wider than 250. Okay. Just having a little trouble advancing. All right, so I've got a few images here to go along with that particular scenario. This picture has been used over and over for a number of years, but it's really good. It shows a series of Category 1 and 2 clear cuts. And what I want to point out here is that the clear cuts, the separation zones, all have a fairly consistent width. If I was to look at this on imagery, I don't see any narrow spots that really concern me. The consistent width is really something that makes me feel that these separation zones are what they need to be to comply. In contrast, we have a situation here in this particular slide. On the left-hand side, we have a series of category 1 and 2 clear cuts, and you can see some narrow sections of the separation zone between a couple of the clear cuts. These are areas where if I saw those on imagery, I'd probably want to go and take a look on the ground and run my hit and make sure that they were 250 feet wide, and maybe they are, but that's something that I would be looking at. Now you can also see this area where yard is embedded within a separation zone. That's something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail a little bit later in the presentation, but that's something else to watch out for. And again, we'll discuss that in a few minutes. Another slide that's been used over and over again for different purposes. This is showing a separation zone that was measured in a couple locations. The separation zone ranges from 275 feet wide to 330 feet wide. So in this instance, the forester gave plenty of cushion so that if there was an error, if the harvester did pick a few trees off the edge or dive into the SEP zone a little bit, they had a little bit of cushion to prevent a violation. And I'm not suggesting that anybody use 330 feet as a guide. Maybe that's excessive, but that's up to you to be the judge. In my view, if you are comfortable with the harvester and you have a good relationship and know the quality of work, 275 seems to be pretty reasonable to me. Okay, our next scenario is inadequate separation zone stalking. And we're talking about category 2 and 3 clear cuts over 21 acres. And just as a super quick review of the stalking requirements, you have two options for these larger clear cuts. One, you need 60 square feet of basal area, and you can see what the requirements are within that 60 square feet. The one thing I'll point out is you do need a strong component of AGS, which is acceptable growing stock. The other option for stalking is to have at least 300 trees per acre, acceptable growing stock, 10-foot softwood, 20-foot hardwood. In both cases, they have to, the basal area and the trees per acre have to be well distributed throughout the separation zone. So what are some of the reasons that can cause inadequate stalking? One reason is potentially a forester doesn't do a thorough pre-harvest assessment of the separation zone on the ground. And portions of the SEP zone just don't meet the stalking requirements. Even to start with, they don't meet the stalking requirements. In my view, there's no substitute for boots on the ground. We have some great resources, some great technology like LiDAR, but getting on the ground and assessing your separation zone in the flesh is really the best way to ensure that you're going to have what you need. In fact, you can even put in the quick plots, the quick cruise plots that were developed by our biometrician probably 15 years ago. And those have been, that process has been made available to the public. Another couple reasons for inadequate stalking within separation zone. This is kind of obvious, but harvesting in the separation zone reduces stalking more than planned. So in this scenario, cut a little too much. The stalking was reduced. Now it doesn't meet the requirements consistently throughout the separation zone. And in a lot of cases, this comes down to communication and control over the operation. And control, in a lot of cases, is exerted through harvest inspections and tweaking things and minimizing problems as they begin instead of letting problems get out of control. So in my view, frequent inspections when there's harvesting in a SEP zone, and good communication to make sure that the harvester and the forester are both on the same page, critical. Number 3 is related. This is harvesting within the separation zone, leaves many damaged residual trees. So like I mentioned, your 300 trees per acre of 10-foot softwood, 20-foot hardwood have to be acceptable growing stock, and 40 square feet of the 60 square feet of basal area has to be acceptable growing stock. Now you can mix and match areas of 300 trees per acre and areas of 60 square feet, but acceptable growing stock has to be a consideration. So the solution here is a lot of what we talked about in number 2, good communication between the forester and the harvester to make sure that everybody is on the same page, frequent harvest inspections, but also, in my view, harvesting in the separation zone is the place for an experienced logger where the forester and the logger have some kind of a professional relationship. You know the quality of the contractor's work, and you can count on them to do a good job in the SEP zone. In the actual clear cut, we're not worried about acceptable growing stock. We're not so concerned about controlled yarding and percentage of the area in trail. When it comes to the SEP zone, this is all important stuff. We need to minimize damage in those areas. Now, I've got a few pictures. 2 images here. The image on the left-hand side shows a post-harvest inspection that was done, I think, in 2021, maybe 2022. You can see a relatively narrow trail, and there is well-distributed stand on either side, and the trees are primarily acceptable growing stock trees, not excessively damaged. So the foresters did the on-the-ground assessment in advance of the harvest, and they did continual inspections. On the right-hand side, there's a forester doing a pre-harvest assessment. This is a forester that I worked with last winter. He was preparing a Cat 2 plan, was concerned that some areas of his SEP zone did not have adequate stalking. So we went together and put in some quick plots. Generally, when I put in plots and I assess SEP zone, whether it's for category 2 or category 3, I want to go to the weakest areas. And if the weakest areas of the SEP zone pass, then I can be pretty confident that the entire separation zone is going to pass the stalking requirements. So we are happy to go on site with you and help if you ask. Well, here's an oldie but a goodie. This slide has been around for a long, long time. If you remember Tom Whitworth, who retired in 2015, he was the one that put this together. Either he was not very good at PowerPoint or the graphics program was not very good at that point in time. But it has stood the test of time, and it does show what we need to see. These are some of the examples of harvest damage where trees are not going to meet the acceptable growing stock requirements. So trees that lean greater than 30 degrees, pushed by the harvesting equipment, will not meet acceptable growing stock. Trees with the tops blown out will not be considered acceptable growing stock. And harvesting damage to the stem or root system that's extensive or excessive, those trees will not be considered acceptable growing stock. And when we look at damage to the stem and the root system, we are looking at a cumulative percentage of the circumference. And you can see the exact requirements in the Chapter 20 rules. Just real quickly, a couple of images of trees that will not meet acceptable growing stock standards. Here we have on the left-hand side top damage to a couple of trees. This one here will not meet AGS. This one here is pretty marginal. On the right-hand side, we have a stem that was significantly damaged. Again, we're not really concerned with the damage vertically, but we're looking at the cumulative percentage of the circumference that was damaged. You can read about that in the Chapter 20 rules. In this instance, we have a harvest that left a number of trees, a significant number of trees leaning more than 30 degrees. This would be an area where I would be concerned if it was a separation zone, because there is a lot of unacceptable growing stock. This one is probably a little bit more than 30 degrees. You have a tree here that's more than 30 degrees, and obviously a softwood in front that's more than 30 degrees. So a lot of bent over trees. That could be an issue in this area. All right, our next scenario is inadequate separation zone stalking or width caused by openings. And I'm not going to review the stalking and width requirements again, but I did in that second line down, you can see I put the basics for stalking. And again, remember that this stalking, the trees and the basal area has to be well distributed through the separation zone. So in this scenario, we're looking at openings being a problem. So some of the openings that exist or are created, we have control over. Others, we have less control over. So I kind of group these types of problems into those two categories. Harvesting within the separation zone creates large cleared openings. This is something that we have a lot of control over. We don't have to create large openings within the separation zone. And a lot of times, this is an issue with planning. I haven't seen this for a while where large openings were created in a SEP zone and they were planned, but I have seen it, and I'll show you an image. So as far as planning goes, avoid doing group selection cuts within your SEP zones. SEP zones, harvesting in separation zones require a light touch in most cases, unless you have really heavy wood and it's going to be easy for you to leave 60 square feet. Typically the SEP zones, you want to use a pretty light touch with harvesting. The final two reasons for inadequate stalking caused or width caused by openings, log landing is established within a SEP zone. So in that particular section of the SEP zone, the zone is not 250 feet wide because of the log landing. This is really a planning issue. It could be a communication issue because I have seen one violation in the past where the contractor expanded a yard that was planned outside a SEP zone and expanded it into the SEP zone. I've only seen that one time. But a lot of times we see plans that come across our desks for Cat 3s that have yards mapped within the SEP zones. If possible, place the yards either within the clear cut or outside the SEP zone. That's the easiest solution. If they are placed within the clear cut, they will not count towards your clear cut area, but they will be considered part of the clear cut footprint. If you have to have a yard within a SEP zone, you're going to have to adjust the width and the area of the SEP zone to compensate for that yard space. Reason number 3, SEP zone contains a non-forested wetland. In this case, there's a non-forested wetland big enough that the separation zone is no longer 250 feet wide because non-forested wetlands cannot be considered part of the separation zone. This particular issue is really the result of planning. However, like I said, this is the one opening type or one of the opening types where we have a little bit less control. We can't control where non-forested wetlands occur on the landscape, but we can modify where our clear cut and where our separation zone is to account for those non-forested wetlands. If you do have non-forested wetlands within your separation zone, compensate. You need to modify the separation zone size and width to allow and compensate for the area in non-forested wetland. Now I've got a few images to show. These couple of images I've shown a number of times in the past. This is what I call the crop circles. This is from over 20 years ago, and it's a little difficult to see on the image on the left, but there are little patches cut within a separation area and separation zone for Category 2 clear cut. The same areas depicted on the image in the lower right-hand side. This was a planned system of group selection of groups that were cut within a separation zone. Obviously, the groups connected by trails, and there was a little bit, if I recall properly, a little bit of light thinning in between the groups. This is an area that we identified as potentially being a problem. We cruised it, and we found that the groups broke the continuity of the separation zone, and they also reduced the number of acres that were available for the one-to-one as planned. In fact, there was, I think when we cruised, a couple of the groups merged together. I think these two little patches here merged together. So this is something to avoid because it's going to break the continuity of your separation zone. I would suggest not doing group selection in these areas. Okay, so now I've got slides or images that are showing non-forested wetland and yards and how they can impact separation zones. On the left-hand side, you can see the separation zone is delineated by a yellow line and a red line. Between that is 250-foot wide separation zone. The clear cut is on the left-hand side, and the separation area would be on the right-hand side. There is a yard depicted within the separation zone, and as I said, that can be problematic. That can reduce your separation zone width and create a violation. The best approach is if you can put your yard space within the clear cut, or you put it outside the clear cut. Otherwise, you've got to adjust your separation zone width to account for the yard. Same thing with the non-forested wetlands. Here's a non-forested wetland right on the edge of the separation zone. If the separation zone could be modified to have that non-forested wetland occur outside the separation zone, that would be ideal. If not, the separation zone width has to be adjusted to account for that non-forested wetland. And non-forested wetland, as you see in this picture on the right-hand side, what we're talking about here is areas with hydric soils that are not dominated by trees. If you went to any of our recent regulatory trainings this year, you were probably exposed to the new interpretation that came out in the winter of 2022, and that is related to determining if you have a non-forested or forested wetland. That interpretation, I believe it's interpretation number 1 in the Chapter 27 section of the Forest Service website. All right, and here's my last scenario. Unplanned Category 2 and 3 clear cuts. So when a professional enforcer is involved, for the large landowners and large land managers, this is not a great concern, but it's something to be aware of and to avoid at all costs. Unplanned Category 2 and 3 clear cuts will result in a violation of, it could be multiple components of Chapter 20 that are violated. So I did list at the top in the second line down The requirements be considered non-clear cut. I think everybody is aware of those. This 450 TPA, that's what we typically call OSR. Obviously, if you have more than 30 square feet of basal area, trees greater than 4.5 inches, that's non-clear cut as well. But you can go to the Chapter 20 rules and refresh your memory on that if you need to. I'm not going to spend much time on it. So now a Cat 1 clear cut is a small clear cut between 5 and 20 acres, and they have the rules are not as strict as they are for clear cuts over 21 acres, the Category 2 and 3 clear cuts. Category 2 and 3 clear cuts have a few things that are a little bit stricter than with Cat 1s. Harvest plan is required, has to be written by a licensed professional forester. There's enhanced stalking requirements for the separation zone. And your separation zone for the larger cuts has to be 1 acre of separation to every acre of clear cut. Typically, when you have an unplanned Category 2 or 3 size clear cut, you have a violation of one or all of these 3 items, and the penalties can be quite significant. So avoiding unplanned Cat 2 and 3s should be paramount. So the top 2 reasons for the creation of unplanned Cat 2 and 3 clear cuts, and this is basically from my experience looking at these for years. Number one, the number one reason, a significant portion of the harvest area is occupied by trails. The result is overall you have insufficient stalking. A lot of times this is the result of poor communication and a lack of monitoring. What I suggest to resolve this is almost every company that I've dealt with, large land manager, large landowner, has a trail spacing policy. So the spacing, the trail width, they're all defined in policy. And making sure that the harvester is aware of that policy and follows that policy is important, because every policy I've seen is way above what would be required from a regulatory standpoint to avoid a clear cut. So if your harvester is following the policies, the contract should not be a problem. So communication and monitoring, I think, are critical in terms of trail spacing and trail width. The composition of the residual stand has a high percentage of unacceptable growing stock. If you have too much unacceptable growing stock, you could end up with a clear-cut condition, and that clear-cut could be big enough to qualify as a Category 2 or 3. The solution here is in the planning, to do the on-the-ground assessment and identify areas where you probably have too much unacceptable growing stock and plan accordingly. So with a pre-harvest assessment in unacceptable growing stock, we're concerned more with the species than with, we're not concerned about residual stand damage because it's pre-harvest. So the key here is to make sure that you don't have an overabundance of pin cherry, striped maple, gray birch, the unacceptable species, if you're trying to leave an OSR condition, an overstory removal condition. They can really be problematic. This slide has survived the test of time. I've tweaked it a little bit. This shows a harvest block. You have wider trails, thicker black lines in the north, and the trails are closer together. This is an area where we may want to be a little bit concerned. The areas to the east, west, and south, the trails are more narrow. They have a thin black line. They are spaced further apart. The yarding is very controlled in those areas. We're less concerned about having adequate leaf strip there. So about, let's see, the year 2000, maybe, the Forest Service conducted an informal study. We looked at a whole number of different OSR cuts in Aroostook County. and we measured trail width, and we measured distance between trails, and we determined that a good rule of thumb is if you have more than 30% or 33% of your harvest area in trails, you are approaching clear-cut condition. So it's kind of the 1/3 rule of thumb that we came up with, and it seems to hold true over the years. This picture may not look like the best picture, but probably better than it first appears. If you look straight down the middle of the picture, that's a skid trail. This fir tree here that's behind what looks like a yellow birch stump, that is the start of a leaf strip. And then there's another skid trail just to the left of that leaf strip. And you can see that the amount of leaf strip, the leaf strip is very narrow. So you're looking at the amount of area in trail in this particular section of the cut is about 50% if that pattern was to continue. If that pattern continued over a very large area, there could potentially be a category 2 or 3 clear cut created just because of trail spacing. And the trail spacing is more of an issue, in my view, with OSR cuts. You really have to make sure that you don't have too much area in trail. This is a image that shows yarding, and particularly over in the left of the image, it shows yarding that was not very controlled. There's a high density of trails. There wasn't a well-established trail pattern, not a lot of control. And so there is a lot of area that was disturbed. A lot of the regen was, and residual trees were damaged because there's a lot of turns in the trails. This is not something that can always be avoided. You can't always have perfectly controlled yarding and a nice pattern that leaves adequate leaf strip throughout your entire harvest area because we're dealing with terrain and topography and other features that can make a good trail layout difficult. So this is just something to be aware of and something to avoid, especially if you have ground that's easily operable. You shouldn't be seeing this type of situation. This is a fairly recent photo. I just pulled this off of Google Earth, and you can see here trail spacing looks like it's very good. Trail width looks like it's fairly confined. I would say probably 20% of the area in this harvest is disturbed or in trails. So there's definitely adequate leaf strip here. If I was to look at that image on Google Earth, there's nothing that I would want to go and look at on the ground as far as FPA goes. As far as this water body goes, that may be a little bit different story. But as far as FPA goes, I'm really not concerned about unplanned clear cuts in that area. So for me in Aroostook County, these are the 3 culprits for unacceptable species that I have seen be a problem in the past. In fact, at 9/11/2001, I was looking at a cut and it looked great. They had done the harvest and there was a lot of residual stems and it looked green. You wouldn't think that there was any problem looking at that cut from the road, but entering the cut, putting in some plots, there was a high percentage of unacceptable species, and that cut ended up being a violation at that point in time. So I think the harvester, no forester involved, the harvester just saw that he was leaving a lot of stems and he was leaving, it looked really green. But the problem is that it wasn't the right species mix. And you can look up the unacceptable species. I think they are within a part of Chapter 20 called not commercially valuable. That may be in the definitions section of Chapter 20. So here's my tips for avoiding violations. Some of these are pretty much a no-brainer, but we'll run through them real quick anyways. understand the Chapter 20 rules and the interpretations. They're both on the Maine Forest Service website under rules and regulations. Thorough planning and on-the-ground assessments are critical. Use easy to understand and highly visible layout, whether it's electronic or whether you're actually flagging buffers on the ground. Good communication between the forester and harvester is important, and this can happen with things like tailgate meetings and walkthroughs of the harvest block. Do frequent harvest inspections to keep control on things, and if problems start, you can minimize them before they get out of hand. Give yourself room for error. It'd be nice to be able to plan every separation zone to be exactly 250 feet wide, drip edge to drip edge. That just doesn't give you any cushion. And no one to ask the Forest Service for help. We're happy to go out and take a look at your separation zones, take a look at what you're planning for clear cuts, and give you advice based on our experience and knowledge of the regulations. So ask us for help if you need it. This last slide is really just a placeholder as we wrap up the recording and answer any lingering questions. These are what I like to call our signature or premier publications. They're all available by contacting the Augusta office or district foresters or regional enforcement coordinators. If there is any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them now.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Dan? I don't see anything popping up. Questions for any of the presenters? Again, lots of information here, but we have a little bit of time and certainly happy to take time to address any further questions. And as you're thinking about that, or if not, I just want to say again, thanks particularly to Dan and Terry and Adam. Great presentations, lots of good information, well presented. These folks are a great resource, so I'll certainly encourage you to reach out to them. Also want to say thank you to everybody attending. Obviously, your interest in the topic is really welcome, that you're willing to take the time and get a little bit more info, and hopefully it'll help you with your process going forward. I'll just remind folks, if you do have an interest in CEUs, just let me know that you were in attendance. I'm putting my email in the chat as we speak. Shoot me a quick email if you want me to make sure to document your attendance. We are very interested all the time in getting feedback on anything that we present, any sort of reactions or feedback about how we can make this information more useful, present it better, things that weren't as clear as you'd like, and other topics that you are interested in hearing more about. So that kind of feedback is always welcome. Dan and all presenters have kind of noted the resources that are on the website. Dan's last slide there shows the Forestry Rules of Maine, which of course is the Reader's Digest version. It's the condensed version, but for a lot of folks, it's a good place to start, and you're more than welcome to get a copy of that from us. They're completely available. And as I noted, if there are other topics, other questions that you have going forward, really hope you will reach out, check the website, but reach out to us and let us know how we can be helpful and provide you the information you need. So at this point, I don't see any further questions. The recording will be available, yes. It'll take a little bit to get that put together and edit out some of the, the intro bit. But certainly if you don't see it, or if you're looking for it in the next, give us to the end of the week and let me know if you have a need for it or want to share it with other folks. At this point, I don't see further questions. Again, lots of good information. So I'm going to close the webinar and say once again, thank you to everybody for attending, and hope we're talking with you again soon. So thanks everyone. Thanks for attending. Thanks for presenting, and we will see everybody before too long. Thanks again.